Next one, we will talk about how to using a while loop to do our input validation. So remember in your homework assignment 5, we asked you to invalidate user input for the dimension of the shape, like circle, rectangle, square. So the radius for circle should be greater or equal to 1. At that time, we show you is you can either print out the error message, then you finish. Or you can using the conditional operator to assign the value if negative becomes 0. But on the other hand here, we also can do is we can using a while loop to get the user's input until that correct. So we know the input validation is a process to expecting the data should be given to the program as an input, and they should be valid. So this input validation, if we add with the while loop, we can use to create the input routine that will reject the invalid data and repeat to ask user for the input until the valid data is entered. For example, remember our assignment 5, we asked you to get the user input for the radius. So if the radius is less than 0, we consider that as an invalid input. So the program actually, before we only show the error message, but now after we understand the while loop, we can update our program to ask for the input message again until the radius is valid. So that's how we can make the change. You see earlier we do the C-in radius, right? So then you see here, if radius less than 0, that means that's invalid input. If that invalid input we just coming to the block, we will prompt the error message, say C out, it is invalid input. Okay, so here we can write, display your error message. So you can see here, if that's invalid input, so then we just display the error message, say invalid input. Then we can prompt to the input again. So please enter the radius. So then we can do the C-in again. So after we get the C-in again, you see here, we will get the new input. So again, we need to go back to see here. If the radius less than 0 is still invalid, so we need to continue to repeat this block. But if the radius, new radius is greater or equal to 0, so when we check the while loop, they will become false. So then we finish. So that's why here your while loop condition actually is if the value is invalid. That's why I will repeat the process again to get the user input. So until this input is valid, so then we finish. So that's the example we write in pseudocode, and this one actually we using the example like we have in assignment 5. So then we can see another example. For example, I want to get a number should be less than 10. So please enter a number less than 10. So that's why we see in the number. So right, so it should be less than 10, right? So if that's less than 10, we finish. So that's why your while loop condition is for the invalid data. So your valid data should be less than 10. So on the other hand, if number greater or equal to 10, this one is invalid input. So then we see out that's invalid input. So then we prompt out again, please enter a number less than 10. So then we do the C-in. So we will do until the input is valid. So that's why here, make sure you can write in the program. So we're using the example here. That's our example. As our example is 0, like earlier we show you. So we have declared a number is doubles. So then we ask the user to enter a number less than 10. So then we need to see in. So since I want less than 10, if greater or equal to 10, I should say invalid entry. So ask the user to enter the number less than 10 again. So then we see in. So of course, at the end, after we're done, maybe we see out. Okay, so then we can make sure we got the user input correctly. So that's now you can see you run the program. So since we ask the user to enter a number less than 10, right? So I see here, that's this line. So how about we give them 100? Okay, you see, then they will say because 100 greater equal to 10, so that's invalid entry. So we ask the user to enter again. So then you need to tell them, please enter a number less than 10. Okay, so then you see, then 10. Okay, I give them 10. But 10 is greater than less than 10 or not, right? It's not, right? We want to less than 10, not equal to 10. So you see, again, they will say invalid input. So then until you give them 5. So then you see the 5, they didn't say anything, so they just give you the number enter is 5. So that's why we can using the while loop to help us to invalidate our user input. So in the while loop, if the user input is invalid, we just tell them the information, the error message. Then we ask the prompt to the message to ask the input again. So then until the input is what we need. So then the while loop will become false. So we skip the block. So then we will display the output. So we can use this flowchart to show you the while loop for input invalidation. Of course, you need to read the value the first time. Then our while loop condition is the value is invalid, right? If it's not invalid, of course, we already finish. But if this one is invalid, we will check. Say this one is invalid, right? So then we display error message. We ask for another value. So after we're done, don't forget, you need to come back to the while loop condition to check if the new value is invalid or not. If it's valid, so that's false. So then we go down. Otherwise, if that invalid, you see, we need to process the block after the while loop again. The next example actually is a peer talk when I was in the campus. So now since we cannot do the peer talk, I just want to work with you. Maybe you are my peer. So this one actually, that's the input validation we modify from the example in chapter 4. So from the example 9 in chapter 4, that we're using for the test score. So remember when we have the if statement, we ask the user for the test score. We want to tell them they are what the letter grade they receive. So then here, if the test score is greater or equal to the minimum score, or less than or equal to the maximum score, you see this one, right? This one is our valid input. If that valid input, we give them the letter grade. Else, before we only can output the error message, say, oh, you need to enter the valid input. But now since we understand the while loop now, can we replace the if-else statement so we can validate the user input? So then we repeat the while loop until a valid input from the user. So that's here you will see this one is our original code. And also under the video, you will see I also give you the link for this chapter 4 example 9. So before we only have the if statement, right? So if that's true, I do this. Else, I just print error message. So now what we should do is we should using this one become the while loop. So this while loop actually we will check if they are invalid. So then we will prompt to the user to say, please enter the valid input. We repeat to ask them. And also here, the if statement to check the letter grade, right? we should move to the end until we get the user input correctly. Do you understand what I say? So that's before. Okay, so what you should do is, now we want to see, because we check the user input greater equal to the minimum score and less than equal to maximum score. We only when the data is valid, we do this. But now here, actually, we need to do a little later. We not just give them the error message. If the data is invalid, actually, I should do what? I should ask the user to enter again. So after we got the user correct input, then we do the check. So that's why let me show you the example, the sample output first. So before you make a modification, that's what I want. We ask the user for the numeric test score. Then I will show you the letter grade. So if the user enter a data is greater than 100, so this one is what? Right, it's invalid. So that's why we give the user error message, say please enter a value in the range of 0 to 100. So then you see you enter again. But then user enter -50. That's invalid score again. So then you need to display the error message again. Then we ask for the score again. So then you see 78, right? That's the right range. So we give them the letter grade. So that's what I want you to modify from chapter 4, example 9. Change to the while loop. So then you will validate user input until they are correct. So then you display the output. Here I will show you how to modify. But now what I want you to do is, please pause the video. Think about how you will do. Then check my answer. Okay, so here is the example 4. So that's why here you will see we have those constant number and the test score. So we ask the user to give us the numeric grade. So I will show you the letter grade. So before, after you see in the test score, we just check. If the test score is in between the greater equal to minimum score and less than equal to the maximum score, so then we do the check, right? Otherwise, we just do the error message. Okay, so now how should we using a while loop to validate the user input? So actually what we should do here is this part, we need to move to the end. Okay, so after this one is correct, I do. So then I need to add the while loop here. Okay, so actually here we need to remove that. Okay, so we need to determine the letter grade later. Okay, but now here actually we should do is, after we got the user input, okay, so then the test score, if that's greater equal to minimum score and less than equal to maximum score, that's valid, right? So now actually we need to do is, if that's invalid, so that is while loop. If this is invalid, okay, so before this one is valid, so that means if that invalid, that means if they are greater equal to minimum score is valid. So that means if they are less than the minimum score, that's invalid. Then the test score is greater than maximum score, that's invalid. And before we used and, but now we should use or. Because either the test score less than minimum score or the test score greater than the maximum score, that's invalid. So that's why here we will show. Then since that's invalid, right? So you will see out invalid. So that's invalid score. So then besides we tell them invalid, we also then tell them, please, yeah, you need to tell them why you are invalid, right? So invalid score, please enter grade between 0 to 100. So then, right, then we need to ask them. So we ask them to enter again. So then we see